You're listening to Feferity Radio.
Never knowing your own true reality, because my thoughts remain like distant quasars. You abuse me, never letting me say and do as I feel. Our thoughts split from love affairs to choice of friends. We argue like two enemies, yet we are good friends. Now there are moments when we harmonize with each other and become one with nature and reality. But these times are few, when after you have replenished yourself, the fear of the truth sets in. We split and you start to run again. Running through women, men, jobs, people, and life, looking for the answer when I had it all along. But I smile, because I am your mind. I was your mind yesterday, I am your mind today, and I'll be your mind tomorrow. And as our end draws near, we will become closer. But you and I, we will never be one. For I will part from you, and you will part from me. You finding another mind, and I another soul. And we'll travel on and on. By the way, I need more than sex to nourish my equilibrium, but I do need sex. I also need sun, trees, stars, creativity, and love, but you saturate my soul with too much of one and not enough of the other. Therefore I cry. But why do we cry? Because tears cleanse the windows of our minds. I am your mind. All your thoughts inside your mind, wanting to be free. Well, now you've got the chance to let your mind grow and be free. Because the music is just trying to say things to free your mind. And if you let your mind be free, then you can understand mine. There's no need to be afraid of me. I want to be your friend. I'm just trying to give you music from deep within. All of your dreams can become reality. My outreach is full, but you've only been turning me halfway. Turn me up, and alpha and theta waves will spew from your pores. Knowledge, peace, happiness, and prosperity will be placed at your feet. Let's create. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. I love this track. It says everything that is in the mind to be altered. Roy is, and you know this is a symbol, a cue for my conversation here on Feferity Radio each and every time. And here today on a regular on a Tuesday, Kenneth Cuvalay, a psychiatric nurse specialised in psychiatric addiction, alcohol addiction. Also is the founding member of the foundation called the Quill, and he lives in the Netherlands. And Dr Kimani Nehusi, a professor of Africology and African American studies and a lot more. One of our lecturers here at the University of East London. They're both on the line. So he is in Pennsylvania in the United States and Kenneth in the Netherlands. See, with technology, all things are possible. Really? Well, if you make it work for you, then all things are possible. But for now, he's working for us here on Feferity Radio. So I want to welcome them both. So welcome to you, Kenneth Koval, and also to Dr. Kimani Nehusi. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Brother Freestyle. It's nice to be here.
Fantastic. And let me try Kenneth Koval in the Netherlands. Kenneth, welcome to Feferity Radio.
Good evening, Freestyle. I'm hearing you. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. A little bit crackly. Yeah, that's perfect. That's beautiful. And
yeah.
Sir Kimani, can you hear Kenneth? You can hear each other?
No, I'm hearing you, but I'm not hearing Brother Kenneth very clearly. It's very faint.
Okay. Well, I mean, the listeners and myself can hear you both very clearly, and I think that is a good start.
Yes.
And I'll make sure that I don't misinterpret what the two of you are saying about each other. I want to say, well, welcome. Dr. Kimani, I mean, Kenneth is a regular co-presenter, I would say, here on a Tuesday. But I want to take the opportunity to welcome you here because this is your first time here on Feferity Radio. And how are you doing?
Thank you very much for your warm welcome. I'm very fine, thank you. Just coming off of a very challenging semester. But I'm okay, thank you.
Okay, what was the semester about?
Well, I was teaching various classes. The huge challenge came with the pandemic and how, as professors and students, our community responded to that pandemic.
Right.
Sometimes we forget the huge emotional and mental impact of events such as these upon people who are doing various things. In this case, students and professors. People have to make very, very quick relocations, all kinds of changes, and these are things that impact upon people in various ways, especially mentally, emotionally.
Indeed, and spiritually, of course, isn't it?
That's where we're going.
I mean, I was just saying you taught and lectured here in the United Kingdom, one of the universities that I attended, the East London University, but you was at the back inside. How long have you been, and you're still telling us you're still lecturing, how long have you been teaching?
Well, it's a long time. I started teaching informally when I was 14 years old and formally when I was 16 years old.
14? And who were you teaching at 14 years old? I mean, your peers or someone older than you?
Peers. I finished all the exams and that kind of thing.
Okay. So you was one of the excellent students growing up in Guyana, right?
Well, some people say that. I don't judge myself, you know. But I was saying that I had exams at around 14 years old, and my mom told me I had to remain in school. You know, you couldn't come out to school and do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I, took opportunity. I, do over the same work, but also explain things to some of my peers. And then I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
I got a job formally as a teacher with the Ministry of Education.
Okay.
So I became a teacher formally.
Right. You must have a passion and a knack for teaching.
A passion and hopefully a knack, certainly a passion. Hopefully I have a knack for doing it. It's not for me to judge. It's people who've experienced me will be able to say that.
I mean, it's such a challenge, isn't it? I mean, at 14, you kind of finished, and, some other children will probably find it very disinterested to do anything. And you took upon the time to be helping others. That must be a challenge, because at that time, those who really are not as brilliant as you might feel a bit jealous, isn't it?
I don't recall any acts of jealousy. They may have been. I mean, at that age, I wasn't very much aware of a whole lot of the things that human beings display in our entire realm of possibilities of our behaviors. But what I do remember is that, yes, I did like explaining things to people. And there was a certain pride in knowing that, in our village, people like Africans all over the world attach great value to knowledge and people who displayed knowledge. And I think that that's one of the things that helped to urge me on.
Yeah, and you've been involved in so many different organizations. You've so many different institutions, and now you are based in the United States, Pennsylvania. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I'm attached to Temple University in the Department of Africology and African American Studies, and it's located in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania.
So have you always been interested in African studies, or is this something that you just picked up at a much more matured age?
I was always interested in African studies. If you grew up in our village, although we didn't use the term African,
right,
and we didn't say things like African studies, it's the kind of thing that you were. And our village, looking back now, was very distinctive because we were composed almost exclusively of African people, and we had that kind of a consciousness. It wasn't very clearly delineated. We lived a lot of it. And it was a bone of contention between our village and other villages. So that sometimes, most times, in competition at school and sports, for example, we rose to the occasion. I mean, we had a school of 300 students or thereabouts, and we would take on other schools with many times our number. Some of those schools had 1,000 plus, 800 plus students. And if we would win most times, but whenever we didn't win, we would really give a good account of ourselves. So we had that kind of a motivation. And for me personally, my mother's mother told me, go to school, take back her education, but not make them fool you. Use an African. And the translation is, go seek out education, but always remember that you're an African. People will try to fool you and tell you that you're European. Don't be confused. You are an African.
Wow, that is
and
very
it stayed with me.
That's very, very powerful.
I was about 12 then.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And when you said at the time, I just wanted to give us a little bit of context there. You mentioned the school, maybe, if you can remember the name of the school. And also you said there was a term used, it was not African. What was the term referred to as African back then?
Well, people would call ourselves black people and so on, but the implication was always African. Remember that this is a village in which people were continuously assaulted from the time of physical and mental enslavement right through up to now.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to a school. It's called St. Bartholomew's Anglican School. It's a primary school for those who are in the United States. It's elementary school.
Right.
And that school was controlled by the European Church, the Anglican Church. And they had a lock around our mental development almost totally. So that, I was given a name brand that was after an international terrorist.
What was the name brand?
I wouldn't dignify it by recalling it. But, it's important for us to understand that my parents, who clearly, without a single doubt, wanted the best for me, were persuaded that a character like that, an international terrorist, murderer, and a rapist, was a good role model for me. That's the kind of thing that those European churches and other institutions imposed upon our people. And it's important for us to understand this.
Indeed. So Kenneth, are you there?
I'm here.
Dr. Kimani has just been giving us a bit of background history about his primary education, his educational attainment. At the age of 14, he says finished school, did his exam, but because he was very young and he couldn't really, there's nothing for him to do, but he stayed and was working around the school campus and also helping out his fellow student at that time. And at the age of 16, he started teaching. You haven't given us a little background. We've been talking for about 4 or 5 weeks now. For the purpose of the listeners, could you just tell us a little bit, about yourself and where you attended school? I know you're from St. Eustatius, but give us a little bit of background on that.
I think slightly very different, because on the island of St. Eustatius, I said once before in the program that my mother reared turkeys, and she did that by doing the most humiliating form of work just to try and it's an education. For better life based on education for the children. So I went out at a very early age. I started working and doing and everything at the age of 8, and the building area. I work in that area. And at a point in time, I think I was 11 or 12 years, I moved on to St. Martin to work, send home money, clothing, and everything to have the rest of those kids home. And only I came to the Netherlands that I went to school, actually, because I quit school on the island at a very young age, like I said, to go out and work to help a parents, a mother, because my father was at the time not being around. And she with 13 kids, I could have possibly been asked at economical act, and I was support my mother in that then. So I went out to St. Martin, traveled from St. Martin on to Curacao. By the way, I'm proud to say it, when I leave from St. Martin to go to Curacao, I worked in the tourist industry for a while. There was no job anymore. And there was cargo shipping from Curacao to St. Eustatius, St. Martin, and St. Kitts to carry down provisions back to Aruba. Eustatius was a very much exporting and growing up provision, which means to say yams and potatoes in this content. And the ship was in St. Martin and didn't really have financial means to pay for my passage of St. Martin. So I encountered a few from St. Eustatius to go to Aruba and Curacao, St. Martin on that particular ship. And I asked one of them, could I help them carry on board their suitcases And by doing that, I will remain on the ship. They can hide me on the cots. They call my cot bed. Kind of forget the kind of it was a cot. You could just fold it up and open it. And then that I get on the ship and I asked them to do one favor, and when the ship is territorial waters, I had a plan. I didn't have money, but I had a plan. I had to move on from St. Martin to Curacao. And so when the passing kids going up to sea, they then told me this is not out of territorial water. Like I gave to the captain, not at the time because I was in assumption that the captain was a gentleman called Mr. Gitt, still living today on Station. I went up to Gittins and I said, I had no money to pay my way down to Curacao, and I decided to stow away on the ship.
That's better.
And
line.
I said, son, I can't. You still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. It was a little bit fuzzy, but now it's a little bit clear. I don't know if you're really moving around, but stay where you are. It's now clear.
No, I'm not moving around. I'm sitting on the same spot all the time. So I'm okay. I said to Mr. Gittins, I didn't have enough to pay. So, and I decided to stow away. So Mr. Gittins said to me, son, I can't help. So he carried me to the captain who was in charge, the lead. And as he opened the door, he carried me to the captain. I think it was 1.5 meters by 1.5 meters or 1.5 meters by 2 meters. And this big, obese captain with a big room was smoke from the cigar. And yet, and when Mr. Gittins presented me, he asked me who I was and name. To him who and my name, and then he asked me for a question. Do you know what I can do to you, son? I said, well, sir, you can do everything to me, but not throw me over. They gave me a job to shine.
Yeah. Is your volume really high? If is your volume really high, maybe you can turn it down a little bit, Sir Kenneth.
Okay. Is this better?
Yeah, that's better, yeah.
So he gave me to finalize my story to finalize your question with an answer from. He gave me as a punishment up to shine a cup symbol on the ship with brasso. Brasso is a shine liquid. You shine copper with. So I shine symbolic ink on the ship mask for one. I got a promotion on the second day to be a student in the kitchen. And so I ended up having a big fight with the passengers who helped, because by this point it was part of the eating with the crew and have common who paid their way. Right. By the time we reached Curacao, the captain asked, do you want to continue? I will offer you a drink to remain on the ship. So I said, sir, thank you much for that grant. But I reached my destination, and I'm much obliged if you can give my passport. He had my passport at the time. So he wished me good luck, and I got back my passport. And I worked in Curacao for 6 years, move on to the Netherlands, and it was was at the time. I decided to go back to school. Elementary.
How old were you
one
then?
Time when I was 7 going on when I reached Amsterdam.
Okay, hold the line there. Hold it there. I mean, try to speak maybe into the phone and don't move, but hold it there. Let me go back to Dr. Kimani. Kimani, welcome back. You there, right?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'm trying to coordinate here. Trying to do the best to make it work. Sir Kenneth, I'm sure you know his background. He was just explaining to us is not as coming from the same background as yours, and he has to go through a lot. And he entered into education quite late. Probably at that time you were a teacher. But for you, teaching, like you said, was your passion, was your love, and you're still doing it. And you're also an expert in language, linguistic, history, culture, research. Also, you've done research in methodology. We're gonna go on to the books that, and also the monographs that you've written back then. But right now, based upon your studies and what is going on right now in the whole of the world, as it is with the lockdown and the COVID and everything else, politics and science and religion, all kind of messed up at the moment. In your studies as a lecturer, understanding the protocol of methodology history, did you foresee this time coming?
No. As a researcher in history or in the other things that I do, languages and so on, I didn't see anything like this pandemic. I've discovered recently that people had predicted it, and that in the United States, there was a branch of the government dedicated to preparing for something like this, which they felt was a distinct possibility, although nobody wished it. But the genius in the White House over here at this moment discontinued that organization, and we know the results of that. So I didn't anticipate or predict anything like this.
And as Africans, we've been in the default position for a very long time. When it comes to politics, new brand of politics, we're the last to enter into it. When it comes to history, we're the last to be. People don't tell of our history. We have to tell of our history. When it comes to diseases, we've seen it. Where do you think, as a professor, studied African history, where do you think we stand right now as a mass of people, country or continent?
Well, I'll answer you in two ways. First, directly on where we stand. And we stand at the bottom of the heap. We're the most unqualified, disempowered, and trampled upon people. The next part of my answer, if I'm would be why that is so. Mm-hmm. And the why that is so has to do with our historical experiences, right, of being oppressed and dismembered by Arabs and then Europeans. Now, I think it's important for us to get beyond mere labels, we were oppressed, people enslaved us and so on, mm-hmm, and understand what exactly happened to us and is still happening to us as a result of those experiences. Mm-hmm. And many of us, because we've read European books and so on, we tend to focus upon the physical aspects of our experiences, especially enslavement and colonialism. Mm-hmm. So we heard that it was brutal work and people were barbarized on the plantations, they were whipped and so on. All of that happened. Mm-hmm. But the most profound thing that happened to us was the cultural genocide and mental imprisonment. Europeans and Arabs distorted and erased our culture. And many of us became infected with what somebody called the European and Arab virus in our brains. Mm-hmm. It's like somebody put a computer program in our brains, and that program determines our possibilities, our capabilities. The erasure of African culture and the implantation of Arab and European culture masquerading as religion and law and other branches of knowledge. Mm-hmm. Those impositions have left us mentally imprisoned. And what I mean by that is that our perceptions and our understanding of things are defined by our enemies, by things that they did to us centuries ago. but because the institutions that are the institutions that socialize us, because they keep replicating racist Arab and European values, we keep being infected with that kind of a virus in every generation. So unless we perceive ourselves as decent people, people who could achieve a whole lot, we're not going to do that. Unless we perceive ourselves as free people, we're going to stand for all kinds of insults. Let me give you an example of what I mean. In the early 90s or mid-90s, we were told that apartheid has ended in Azania, South Africa. And lots of people were cheering and saying, fine, this is so on and so forth. Could you show me, or anybody show me, a single blade of grass that was returned to our people at the point of that so-called liberation? We've been silent on this. Where is justice in that arrangement? Now, I don't believe that Jewish people were wronged when they received or were given reparations. That's the just thing to do, because these people were treated very badly. They were severely damaged. However, African people have suffered far more. But somehow or the other, we never talk about ourselves as people who need reparations, except for some of us who are conducting that struggle right now. You know? But for other people, it's a foregone conclusion. They would not settle for anything less than that. But in our communities, you could come and shed a few crocodile tears and say how sorry you are, and it's okay with us. You know, and it's this kind of a mindset that programs us to accept insults, thinking that we're getting justice. And there are many other examples we could, we could talk about. For example, let's stay with Azania, South Africa. How do we define ourselves there? Most people say we're blacks. Nobody's talking about being African. You know? And we're the ones with the problem of self-knowledge and self-definition. If you go around the world to our communities and you invite our people to say, well, who are you? Oh, I'm Thomas John, a European name. Or I'm a Christian, European imprisonment in the religion. Or I'm a socialist. That's another European branch of knowledge and ideology. It may offer something better than others, but it's the same thing. It has its limitations. Very few of us say, I'm an African, and really know and understand what that means. And that, to my mind, epitomizes our condition in the world. It's the clearest and deepest statement about our predicament. And what that means to me is that unless we recover our African personalities, we are always going to be at the bottom of the heap. Because if you don't know, or anybody doesn't know who he or she is, then that person will not know or know for certain what their real interests are. And if you don't know what your real interests are, or you're uncertain about your real interests, you're not in the best position to effectively defend and advance your interests.
All the points you've made, they're so valid. And you mentioned the word perceived. Until we perceived ourselves as dignified and doing the right thing. That really touches me, because there are lots and many of, yourself and many individuals landed successful, wealthy, who've perceived themselves to a higher standard, and yet the eyes that they looked upon them is still the same as someone who perceived themselves as a slave. So that to me, it got me really thinking. Also, when you talk about people said they are Africans, but they don't know what it means, I really, want to take this opportunity to, in your own understanding as a landed man, what does it mean to be an African? What does it mean?
Well, to me, to be an African means several things. Number one, it means that you live or attempt to live African culture and African understanding every minute of every day, of every hour, of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year, throughout your entire life.
Is it by the clothes you wear from time to time? Is it the language that you speak, the African dialect? Is it the understanding about the African culture, or is it the practice of the African culture that makes one super African? Did you hear me there?
Hello?
Yeah.
No, I didn't. I'm now hearing you.
Yeah. Sorry.
Should I continue?
Yeah. Did you hear the question or what I just said?
Yes, what it means to be an African.
Yeah.
Right. I was hoping to say that to be African means that you live and breathe African culture identity.
Mm-hmm.
We see everything. It's a perpetual occupation. It's 24/7, 365.
Mm-hmm.
And the African understanding or knowledge of the world is fundamentally a spiritual one.
Right.
And what we mean by that is that African people understand that we human beings are part of nature, of the environment. We differ from barbarians who've come recently and believe that they could conquer and control nature, and that they're separate, distinct, apart, and superior to nature. We know that we're a part of nature. We could call ourselves a special part of nature.
Right.
But our ancestors always knew and understood that we're a part of nature. And this is deeply scientific. We could come back to that if you wanted to. But there are other aspects of that spiritual understanding that I think it's important to sketch out. Another one is this, that in our relationship to nature, we relate to the entire environment, all of nature, because we understand that everything is interrelated. So when Rasta people say everything is everything, what they mean is that interrelationship of everything in the universe. And we see this. We might think that we are not related to people and things that seem distant. But you know, these barbarians who've physically conquered us and imposed their rule on us, and I'm talking about Europeans now, they've abused the environment. And look what's happening in the world today. Even this pandemic, by the recognition of some experts, has been caused by damaging the environment. Now, we cannot escape the fact that through the abuse of the environment by Europeans mainly, this earth has been brought to the brink of destruction. But our ancestors, thousands of years ago, understood this question. In every part of Africa you go, where our people retain some semblance of ourselves. People have what the Congo people call kina. It's a word that's used in Guyana also, which means that there are certain things you don't kill and you don't eat. You relate in a positive way to those animals or plants. And we must pause to recognize the consequence of that. Because if in your village the lion isn't killed or eaten, it means that the lion is a protective and preserved species in your area. In the next village, it may be the antelope. In the other village, it might be the snake. In another village, it's another animal. The effect of that is that throughout the land, there is a network of species protection and preservation that spreads itself across the land without a single fence or a gun. Our people practice that. And further to that, we embedded that in our daily understanding of things. Because everything that was important, we said this is sacred. This is in the realm of the sacred of the gods. So we would, if we wanted to go hunt, say the solemnest declaration, you could call them prayers, pouring libation, to the divinities and promise that we will not take more than we need from nature for our survival. So if we saw 10 antelope in the bush and our family needed 4, we would not try to shoot all 20 of them. That wasn't our mindset. But these barbarians came and told our people, oh, you're worshiping rocks, you're backward, and so on. And they introduced murder of animals. They called it shooting for sport. And they depleted the environment. You know, our people had sacred groves, still have. Nobody chops down anything in those sacred groves. You go there for reflection and so on. But that's preserving that branch of biology. So today, when we hear about environmentalism in Africa, who fronts it? Some Europeans. And many of our people believe that these are the ones who introduce environmentalism to our communities. But we've been practicing that from inception, from time, as we would say. And when I talk about knowing our history and understanding our history, these are some of the things I talk about. Now, let's be clear that this is strictly scientific. It's spiritual in the sense of we understand our interrelationship with the environment, the different people and things in the environment, and so on and so forth. I don't want to go on and on and on, but I hope that single example illustrates some of what I meant when I said we are deeply spiritual people. And we're spiritual because we recognize our connection and we practice our connection to the universe.
I mean, a lot of people listening, especially from the continent, even the Caribbean, will really they understand it and they feel it, what you just said. And to add to that, talking about what we need, you know, we only go and fetch what we need. I mean, I, as a child growing up in Sierra Leone, in the countryside, in the northern part of Sierra Leone, Koinadugu district, I saw where even fruit, you don't go pick the fruit if it's not ripe. Also, you can only pick if it's ripe what to eat, and you're not allowed to sell it. This was even not donkey years ago, but very early 70s. Also, in terms of the spiritual connection, because you mentioned the animals as well. I mean, there's so many different cultures within Africa that represent, the animal represent those different cultures. When you mentioned about spirituality, one thing that came to mind is the fact that back then, when we talk about ancestors now, it seems as if we're very far away. But back then, burial, we don't have cemetery. People buried in their own plot, in their own, on their ground. So therefore, when we look at that spiritual connection back then, everything that attached to it in terms of the message and the connection to the dead and all of that is because of these factors that our dead is not far away from us. They're within the vicinity, like you talk about the environment where you said everything is everything, where they're within the vicinity that they were born. Now, do you think the detachment that we all experience in terms of our spirituality is based upon the environment that we are placed in, and also the chaotic confusion about what it really means to be an African, where some people will go onto the same tree, they will pick the fruit that they think, well, even though it's not ripe, I can put it and wait till it's ripe. We kind of lose sense and track of the principle of that. So do you think, specifically in terms of the cemetery, the burial, because I think that has so much connection if we're looking at ancestry, do you think because now we're so displaced and we're scattered around the environment and we don't really have chance to bury our loved ones, our families, ourselves in our own environment, our own yard, like they say, or in our own compound, do you think that is one big factor that is really making it so difficult for us to connect?
Yes, most definitely. But before I go into that, I would want to take a little issue with you. As far as I'm concerned, there's a single culture throughout Africa and has always been, except for when foreigners introduce their own different culture.
Right.
What we have in Africa is differing manifestations of the same thing. It doesn't, in my estimation, mean a big difference. If you did something on the Monday and the other set of people over there normally do it on a Friday or on another day, you know, but these are surface variations. And when we dig deeper, we see that they all represent the same principles, or this is the tendency. And I think it's important for us to define ourselves as one people, one culture with different manifestations, because if we remain divided in our heads, in the way in which we perceive and think about ourselves and each other, we're weak. So we got to see ourselves as one.
I mean, in the context of what I said, I mean, my view was a kind of unifying view I looked at it, even though I talk about the different cultures, but it was with a unique sense of the oneness. But go ahead.
All right. Thanks for that. For me, I would go with you in terms of the way in which we no longer practice our rituals. Our behaviors have become affected by the penetration of our environment, by foreigners who are really our enemies. These are the people who did the most unspeakable things to us. And they still control our resources and drain those resources off for their own benefit. You know, that's why we are the richest continent in the world with the poorest people. You know, we live those contradictions every day. But let me just emphasize this thing about practice and burials. Yeah, our people understood that when you bury a physical body in the ground, it makes the ground, to use a word, holy. We're more attached to that place, that piece of ground, because our ancestors are buried there. So that's holy ground. It's not, you know, we have a psychological attachment to that ground. And let me just say this, even before we die and we're buried, we already had a psychological attachment to Mother Earth. Because in African practice, and we know this from the time of the ancient Egyptians at the very least, people disposed of the navel string and the placenta ritually. And it was usually by burying in the ground. And if your navel string is buried in a particular plot of ground, you have a psychological and emotional attachment to that plot. Even among many Africans, where in the Americas, white people tried to practice cultural genocide against us and erase our culture. You go to most parts and you say, many of a string buried there, or some variation of that in different languages. If you say my navel string is buried in that piece of land, everybody understands that that's an irrevocable attachment you're announcing to that piece of land. Nobody could shift you. And this has been Africa from time immemorial. The people of ancient Egypt called Inner Africa Ta-Iyaku, for example. Ta-Iyaku means the land in which my ancestral spirits dwell. Land of my ancestral spirits. They called it also Taniter, God's land. They called it placenta land. What these ancient Egyptians were announcing is that their foreparents come from Inner Africa and that their navel strings are buried there. So, you know, we have ways of understanding ourselves that our oppressors would never ever explain to us, because they don't look upon us through our own cultural eyes. And we're the ones who've got to recover our culture and use that for the explanation of ourselves.
And pause there.
So all over Africa you go.
Pause there for a bit,
Sorry?
because I said pause there for a bit. Pull the pin there. We're gonna go for a short pause on top of the hour, 8 o'clock. And then when we come back, we continue that. But also think about this question, because I think we all know somehow, we all have a very different description of what is an African, who is an African, what we're supposed to be. But I don't think we fully understand how to define European. So let's think about that. When we come back, we'll actually talk about that. You're listening to Dr. Kimani Nehusi and also Kenneth Koval. Kenneth, you're there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, hold the line. We're going for a short pause.
You went to Africa and you told the Africans that they must all become Christians. Because if they become Christians, when they die, they will go to heaven. Because heaven is a wonderful place. Ladies and gentlemen, if heaven was such a good place, do you think white people will tell black people about it? So we came to England with all the expectations of being equal. Here we are in the mother country. The white man can't come to terms with it. But I'll tell you something, as I've said before. If you English people, not white people, if you're not English, you're welcome to stay in England. If you're English and you don't like the way we are running England, please leave.
You're listening to Feferity Radio.
Welcome back after that short pause there. I hope you really like our sweeper here on top of the hour, each hour on Feferity Radio. My name is Freestyle, and here on a Tuesday, on a regular, is Kenneth Cuvalay, Social Psychiatric Nurse. Today alongside Dr. Kimani Nehusi. And I was just speaking to Kenneth there because we've been conversing for a long time, and it's best that we give a lot more time to Dr. Kimani Nehusi. So I want to welcome them both here on Feferity Radio. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you?
I'm pretty okay, Brother Freestyle.
Fine,
Thanks
thank you.
again for having me on your program.
You're welcome. Sir Kenneth, I mean, before we go back to you, Sir Kimani, I know you're holding your thought there. Sir Kenneth?
Yeah.
Were you able to listen to what Sir Kimani was saying?
Yeah, listening to most of it. That missed out on, but importantly enough, I reiterate that I'm going to go to Brother Dr. Professor Kimani, modern science, must say, when it comes to African spirituality and our vision about us in relation.
Stay on the line. Stay on the line. I mean, don't keep going in and out, so we can hear you clearly. So, Kenneth.
I'm not going in and out. I think it's the way of the connection because I'm sitting on the spot.
All right. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. When we've been in the past weeks talking about spirituality and our ancestors' powers, and I'm very pleased to have the prophecy go somewhat into those elements, because at the same time, what I heard him say, our ancestors conclude long time ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, can conceive of human apart from its relationship to the invisible spirit. And that's in a nutshell.
Right.
Understood. And I heard you are going with a more deeper clarification to the cosmology of our ancestors, versus our surrounding and how we are dependent on surrounding and the superior powers as such from eternal spiritual beliefs. So I am here, Kimani is this to another level together with us here today.
Fantastic, brilliant. That's Kenneth Cuvalay in the Netherlands. Welcome back, Dr. Kimani, in Pennsylvania.
Yes, thanks. I'm here.
I know you're a master of recollection, so I assume that you, before the break, you were talking about African practices, our connection to Africa, the naval tradition, and that reminds me very well. Born in Sierra Leone, and most of us as children back then, I'm not sure about the children of the late 70s or the 80s or so on, but most of us, our navel was buried at the back of our yard. And we use that to say that no one has the right. I mean, when we talk about human right, and I think fundamentally this is what you were saying, no one has the right to ostracize you. No one has a right to throw you out of that place, because why? You are connected to it by birth.
Yep. Yeah. And this is one of the ways in which African people have always had a very, very respectful and elevated estimation of Mother Earth, and that we've always practiced. And everywhere in Africa you go, you will find that there are divinities, stretching from ancient Egypt to contemporary Africa. All over. There are divinities, masculine or feminine divinities, or both, that are earth divinities. And it's important for us to understand that as part of a system in which African people have always respected the environment, Mother Earth, and understood that we are part of nature, not apart from nature, which was a principle I announced at the beginning of the conversation. So that's one of the ways of being African. We are not going to attempt to conquer and butcher nature. We're part of nature. And therefore, we have a very great responsibility to preserve nature, not to destroy nature. Because if we destroy nature, eventually we are destroying ourselves. Because in our people's understanding of things, everything is everything, meaning all aspects of the environment and of the cosmos are interrelated and interconnected. So when we did those practices and we said we're not going to be killing or eating this animal over here, meaning we're going to preserve this animal. You over there could do it with another animal and so on. That was our system, and perhaps the most effective system. Environmentalism, species protection and preservation. There are other ways in which our people show our connection to the entire cosmos. And the way in which we perceived and treated our ancestors, it's another big key. You know, Birago Diop's song says, or poem says, those who have died have never ever left. They're always around us. They're in the whispering streams. They're in the rustling trees and so on. And what that means for us is that our ancestors live in us and among us. Those of us who were snatched away from Africa and subjected to the attempts of cultural genocide, our stories in the Americas are still populated by ghosts. In some parts of the Americas, we say jumbie or zombie for ghost. That comes from the African word for a ghost, for our ancestral spirits. You know, and our people knew that because of DNA and genes, our ancestors live in us. So we always understood that it is important for us to honor our ancestors. Now, Europeans and some misguided Africans say we worship our ancestors. We don't worship our ancestors. We propitiate them. It's the next step before worshiping. We treat them most honorably because we understand that if it was not for our ancestors, we could not be here physically, sociologically, culturally, or in any way, including spiritually. So we honor our ancestors because they're tremendously important.
Absolutely.
And if we understand the significance of our ancestors, we're going to stop trying to forget them. We're going to stop perpetuating generation gaps among our people, you know, and in effect weakening ourselves. We're going to reap the benefits of all the experiences of our ancestors. It's not coincidental to our current lowly position throughout the world that Arabs and Europeans butchered our indigenous knowledge system. In this current pandemic, many of our people have come up with cures for the virus that come out of their grandmother's recipes. Boiling garlic and onion and turmeric and ginger, and either drinking a little bit of that, they might put in other things, or putting your head over a bowl or some receptacle of it and put a towel to keep in
the heat,
the heat, and you the steam, and you breathe that in. You know, it knocks out the virus. Well, if you grew up when I grew up, that was part of your experience. You started getting the flu, and some adult says, come, put your head over that, cover it, breathe in, and they give you the instructions. And a couple hours after, you're doing the things that boys and young people do. You've forgotten you ever had such an attack.
We used to have a three-port, like, you know, the three stand, you know, the pot with the three sort of legs. And that's especially where they used to use to boil all those different herbs. And it remains in the pot. All they do is just sometimes after a while they renew the herbs and they just pour water.
It's an iron pot. Yeah. Now, I'm telling you this, and we're recalling this, but this is something that survived from thousands of years of accumulated medical knowledge. Many of us don't understand this, but I can't speak very much for the continent, although I know that there are people who are called bush doctors and witch doctors and so on. These are derogatory names for scientists. And our systems have broken down in many ways. But it's important for us to understand that the African legacy in medicine and spiritual medicine, which Europeans call psychology and psychiatry, is our people's knowledge and legacies thousands of years old. Just consider that 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, our people were performing brain surgery in Kemet, ancient Egypt. Just consider that. You know, so when we talk about the ways in which these barbarians have impacted upon us, it becomes important for us to also measure the destruction that they have done. Think about where African people and where the world would have been had these barbarians not destroyed and distorted our indigenous knowledge systems. Just let's think about that. You know.
Yeah.
And you know, they try to deny that. They try to say that we were nothing. Right now, the people in Madagascar have come up with a treatment for the virus. White people are trying to discredit it. Many of them are trying to pretend it doesn't exist.
And that,
for me,
yeah, go on.
For me, this part of what this means is that we must be engaged in talking about ourselves, in accumulating knowledge and understanding about ourselves, in defining ourselves. I don't want to be defining Europeans. Now, it doesn't mean that we mustn't know them, because we need to know our enemies.
Yeah, but this
I
is...
think that...
Yeah, go on.
Go ahead.
No, I mean...
I think that we need to be very careful, you know. And
well, this is the point, though, Dr. Kimani. This is the point, right? I mean, everybody have described, you know, misrepresented us and described us to how they see us. And you mentioned that some people do refer to themselves as slaves, I mean, and all the different derogatory connotations. And some people live with it. But however, though, in most of our studies, I mean, we fail to come up with a definition that is unified. I mean, you've just been saying barbarian. Some people say cocosoil. Some people said, you know, different names. So why can't we define Europeans to better understand them?
I see where you're going, and I agree with that. But I'm saying that, on balance, we should spend more time defining ourselves. And I think it's important, too, to understand that because we're coming from so much devastation, our self-knowledge is a process. We're not going to develop the kind of complete or substantial knowledge of ourselves, again, overnight. It's going to be a process of reclamation, reaffirmation, clarification, and so on. And some of our scholars are engaged in that process right now. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. But I am interested in the example you gave about some people saying that we are slaves. When people tell me that, I always say, my ancestors were never slaves. And I pause. And then I say, they were enslaved Africans. And I think it's important for us to understand how even the terms we use to describe ourselves could be deadly harmful. These are terms that were imposed upon us by the people who did the worst crimes ever in human history to us.
So what do you make of, I still really would love a definitive definition, because as a black man, I've read, I've heard, I've seen how we've been misrepresented and described, but I haven't. I've heard in little pocket squares about, you know, the reference to Europeans. I mean, when we do this, we're not doing it in a derogatory or to put down, but intellectually, we've been described and we've been categorized. And we're going to try and get Dr. Kimani back. But I would be very, very interested to kind of find a way, I mean, for someone to, I mean, explain the real true, okay, we're going to get him back right here. And Kimani is back. Welcome back.
Yes,
I mean, we've got a very a short life. But you see what I'm saying? I mean, Dr. Kimani, it's like intellectually, though, is in the books of so many descriptions about us. And we have, I mean, tried to surpass that and redefine ourselves through intellectual properties, through education, and all of sorts. But we are so divided in coming to a definitive description, a definition of Europeans.
Look, barbarian, you know,
is a character that people probably we can have as well. I mean, we can say probably through the attitude, one can be barbarian. So it is an attitude, is a behavior. But how do we intellectually define Europeans to a better understanding, a unified understanding, really? Let's put it that way.
I'm not too certain that we need to place emphasis upon a unified understanding of them, or even come to a single descriptor of them. I think once people understand that Europeans are a whole mass of people, most of them are racist and misguided. There are a few decent people. There are people among them who are trying to be decent. We've got to be honest and recognize these complexities, you know. But as a group of people, their weight upon us has been very heavy and very negative. And we've got to begin with that understanding and proceed with that understanding. And substantially, this is about our own self-knowledge, self-organization, and agency. We must always be thinking and acting on our own behalf. And my point about the term enslavement, I don't know how much you heard about what I was saying, but to me, that is one of the terms that we use that illustrates how that virus they planted in our brains is still articulated through the terms we use to describe ourselves. So when we say that we are slaves, or our ancestors were slaves, we're actually saying, number one, that they were passive people, and that's not true. They resisted from the inception till the end of physical enslavement. Secondly, we're obscuring their identity as African people. That's the work of the enslaver, because they knew that once we understood who we are, we're African people, they would have a far greater time in making us passive workers, which is what they wanted. So the term slave is in their interest because it articulates their perception of us. We who say, no, we weren't slaves, we were enslaved Africans. We emphasize the force that we used to put us in that condition, and the force that we used to perpetually fight against that condition. And we also say African. That gives us our identity. It's a revolutionary term just to say no to slave, yes to enslaved Africans. And there are many, many other terms that have been imposed upon us by our enslavers that we still use today. And this articulates, it announces our mental enslavement. Because it doesn't matter how much we think we are free. If we continue to perceive and think and act within the parameters imposed by our oppressors, we are still imprisoned, and we are imprisoned in the worst possible way, mentally.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the voice there. My special guest on the line, Dr. Kimani Nehusi, a professor of Africology and African Studies, lives in Pennsylvania. And also I have Kenneth Cuvalay. Just to know that you're not away, you're not gone. Kenneth, are you there?
I'm very much here. I'm here.
Right.
I'm here, brother.
Your line today is being overpowered by Dr. Kimani Nehusi. I'm not sure why that is.
Well, I think it's the of our ancestors decide how the course of this process dialogue should be going. So I am very much comfortable with it.
And you sound much more clear now. I think they've accepted you.
Oh, well, we have to accept powers. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to go into, I think, discussion dialogue in relation to defining the barbaric methods of barbarian. Not all of them, like Dr. Kimani, but generally speaking, Europeans, perhaps, and not the Asians. They are the ones who destroy or attempt to the civilization of a continent, the African civilization. So I think the action itself defines them in essence. It's barbaric, inhumane practice in destroying people who are human, or they attempt rather to destroy human and the surroundings, our environment, the birds, the trees, the animals. All of these things coincide in their barbaric action. And one of the more important things, I think, that European patients realize that the spirituality and the mentality of our ancestors and the forces which still live within us as African throughout the world today, whether it's in motherland or the diaspora, they cannot you and enslave you as they attempt to do in a more form, because that meaning of spirituality and mental power and retain us in our identity is.
Okay. I think Sir Kenneth is having difficulty. Let's let me go over now to Dr. Kimani. I'm sure you're there listening. If Kenneth was just solidifying what you were saying. There is this question, failing to define European, have a clarity. What do you think of the word and the practice of assimilation?
Well, it's one of those important terms that announce a process that we need to be very careful about. Assimilation into whom or what? Why should African people assimilate into European culture? That's a fundamental question. And in the context of our specific experiences of colonialism, it raises some very important questions, because most of us who want to attempt the impossible and try to become European are not merely attempting the impossible. we're devaluing ourselves as Africans and actually saying that to be European is to be superior. Now, this doesn't mean that there wouldn't be certain things here and there that we get from them that we could use to better our own condition for our own purposes. I mean, if we say that technology, for example, is a European thing, to the extent that that's true, we're using something we got from them for our own purpose, to advance our own interests right now. And this is one example in which it's good. But what I'm talking about is this mad and idiotic rush to ape Europeans in the belief that in doing that, we make ourselves better people. It's a mental sickness that says to be African isn't good enough. So to be European is good enough. And if we pursue that further, we could see that we are dishonoring our ancestors. Those of us who are confused and we believe in Christianity should recognize that we are dishonoring God. Because if God made us in a certain way, and we're trying to change how God made us, what kind of Christian is that? So it's very important that we see assimilation or attempts to assimilate to European ways as something that's impossible, it's stupid, and it's the most damaging thing we could do to ourselves, because we're deserting our own African culture and identity and attempting the impossible, that of acquiring other peoples. So that in a nutshell is my approach to it. It announces a lot of things that are to be discarded. And while we're on it, let me just say one more thing. This acknowledges that many of us were placed in a situation in which we had to make gestures, or more than gestures sometimes, to accommodating and practicing aspects of European culture. I mentioned the school system when I was growing up on this forum early on. And simply put, if you wanted to go to school and get an education, you had to become European in certain ways. Your name, you had to contribute to their church. In other words, you had to become a member of their church because the church owned the schools. Yeah. You had to subject yourself to the relentless indoctrination into Christianity and other ways of articulating European values and debating African values. In many parts of Africa, if you were caught speaking your own language, they put a dunce cap on your head and made fun out of you.
That's right.
These are the things that people who call themselves advanced, superior, democratic, Christian, enlightened, that's the kind of barbaric practices they did. And they did worse than that. So when we talk about assimilating, we need to be very clear that our culture is the most ancient culture in the world. Our people are the most civilized people in the world. And that to try to join some barbarians in their practices is not a step forward. And if you don't believe me, survey the continent of our ancestors today. We're busy trying to become like them. And that's the trap.
I mean,
there are African countries where people dress in suits in the hot weather, put on wigs, the judges and the lawyers, and we have cultural traditions and law and other things that are thousands of years older than Europe's. So we've got to go back and start refurbishing our own practices and respect them. We speak not our own languages in parliament and pulpit and other places. We speak European languages. That's the most ridiculous thing. Because when you go to the courts, for example, in a language with which you're unfamiliar.
Sorry, I mean, 1 second. Could you say that again? When you
really.
said when you go into court, we just missed that. Yeah.
If you take somebody from the great majority of people in Africa, not only Sierra Leone or Nigeria, the great majority of people in Africa understand some African language the best because that's our mother tongue. And if you require me to go to a court and listen to charges against me read out in English or French or some European language with which I'm unfamiliar, you're not serving my best interest. If I have to give testimony in that language, you're not serving my best interest. A complete master of that language, to use that term. And if you talk about translation, there's always something lost in translation. And it's another rung of expense and bureaucracy. Let us respect ourselves enough to use our own languages.
That is a very good point, using our languages. And the reason I ask for that, because, I mean, in terms of assimilation, the words that we use, the language that we speak, especially away from the motherland, and like you mentioned, also in the motherland, it's borrowed. It's something that is derived from, not from the African dialect and understanding at all. And some of these misunderstandings some do have in the West, where you talk about the languages, in Africa, where if you're speaking your languages the way that the Europeans will treat you in Africa. Here, some of us that came from the diaspora or from the Caribbean did experience that, where, you open your mouth to speak, even though you look the same as them, yet it is like we're not the same just because you speak differently.
Well, that's the kind of backwardness, the kind of demonstration of how the European virus, has infected the brains of some of our people. If you go to a country like Holland, for example, and you impose the same rules upon the language that Europeans try to impose, with quite a few different languages being spoken in Holland. They look at the slightest variation, Europeans do, and say that means difference. And we've got to be alive to these things. It's not because somebody has a different accent that person is either superior or inferior. And we've got to get beyond this. I'm very interested in the question of Ebonics. Because when those European barbarians kidnapped our ancestors and forced them to work on plantations in the Americas to create riches for these Western countries, our ancestors invented new languages on the spot. And these are the Creole languages. They're deeply related to the languages we call Pidgin language, Pidgin English,
or Patois.
But these are really African languages that have been re-lexified. In other words, our people kept the African grammar and the African worldview, spirituality, and so on. And we borrowed some words the majority of the words from a European language. But there are many words from Africa that remain in those languages. And the way in which we pronounce those words remain African, except for some of us who want to, ape Europeans. And it's important that we understand that. And even there, Europeans try to discredit our ancestors and talk about Creole languages or Dutch-based Creole or English-based Creoles. But those very Europeans will say that the grammar is the base of a language and that's what you must name it by. But when they come to our creation, our people's creations, they flip it. They stand on their heads and say Dutch-based and English-based. It's dishonoring our African ancestors. They're the ones who invented those languages, and those languages are based in the African grammar. And it's a single grammar. You may get some words from Dutch or French or something like that. But that's the major difference, and it's not as different as many of us are.
What I was saying, I've thought about it very deeply in terms of the technology, in terms of the technological age or technology in general, that given the opportunity or given the historical understanding of what happened back then. So Kenneth, you're there, right?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. We're trying to get Dr Kimani back. It's not an easy line. Let's do that. But I mean, I'm really wondering whether, because if you look at the way education was deprived from us long ago, I mean, Dr. Kimani mentioned that. And now you look at technology, the introduction of technology for so long, and the way it actually benefited us. And I think, I don't know if it's something to do with this pandemic is to halt the way that we use technology. Of course, it's going to affect the way we use technology, but is it to our disadvantage? What is happening right now? Is this, if they're going to be blocking technology in the way that we can't use it the way we used to use it, is it to our own disadvantage, Kenneth?
It can have a advantage depending on what we are and what we think we need of this technology. I think
we've got Dr. Kimani back.
And I think it's very
Yes,
I think it's very important that we think about more insight pertaining to education as to what our foundation as African people were based on in the first place. And on that concept, we can build and utilize segment or element out of the technology.
So Kenneth.
But to go and, yes, yeah.
Sorry, the line, I mean, is really not so great today at all. I really don't know why. I mean, every word is cutting out, or sentence, you have one or two words cutting out there as well. But because we're so close to the time, 9 o'clock, I mean, if you could allow me just to, to speak to Dr. Kimani, I mean, I'll be really pleased with that. I appreciate it. Thank you. So Kimani.
Yeah, like already do
brother.
that.
Right. I mean, I was saying, I mean, you made mention of the deprivation, I mean, in education, and we've read that as well, where our people were deprived from educating themselves, going into schools, in libraries, and reading books. And I've actually come to the conclusion that technology has benefited us as Black people or African people around the world more because of these disadvantages that, back then. And in most cases, in terms of economic, position, a lot of people cannot afford to send their children to a better school. But at least with technology, we know much more now than we knew before. Do you think going forward, I mean, if they sort of like, this pandemic and the way you using technology, do you think if it's trampled on or being restricted will be at our disadvantage?
Yes, in the short run, we will be disadvantaged. But let me step back and try to put this question in its widest historical and sociological context. Let's be clear that African people not only invented humanity, but also invented sociology, socialization, and invented education, which came later on as a subset of socialization, a way of quickly getting people to obtain certain standards in learning and behavior. And Arabs and Europeans went to Africa and destroyed those systems, or substantially destroyed them, and created the conditions in which we had to go to their schools, as I said before, in order to achieve a semblance of education. Now, they were miseducating us all the while. They were trying to teach us and inculcating into us that they're superior to us and we're inferior to them, that we must accept their exploitation and oppression of us. So today, the critical issue is our minds. Are we liberated or are we not liberated? Are we fighting for our mental liberation or are we not? Technology is a tool, an occasion for either advancing our struggle or Europeans advancing their struggle and Arabs advancing their struggle to oppress us. That's what it is. Like any tool, we could use it for our advancement, or we could allow our oppressors to use it to further oppress us. We here in this discussion are using the tool of technology to talk about ourselves, hopefully in ways that are progressive and meaningful, even revolutionary. And to me, it's an illustration of how we could use this tool for our own benefit, our own purpose. But that's the most meaningful question here. The tool, how do we use this tool?
Yeah. How do we use the tool? It is the big question, and how we've been using the tools. I mean, the tools we've been given, I mean, you will agree that is a choice. And it's very difficult to have a unifying structure of how we're supposed to use it. I mean, do you think that is the problem? Because, you know, everyone is left to their own device?
It's part of the problem. I mean, we've got to approach our struggle in the most organized and unified way. And the more we're disorganized and disunited, the less effective our struggle would be. So, sitting down and thinking about it logically, we have to conclude that we need to be unified and organized. This does not exclude the fact that because of variations in our different situations, say in one country or one region, the response may be articulated a bit differently from what it would be in another place. You know, we must be able to fight our fight in ways that suit the complexity, or complexities, if I may, of our condition. The other thing I want to say here is this, that we need to be careful about the tools we inherit or we are given or that are available to us. Remember that the tools of the master, the oppressor, were designed by the oppressors for the purposes of the oppressor. They weren't designed by us for our purposes. And what this means is that sometimes we have to be very careful to recognize the strengths as well as the limitations of whatever tool we're trying to take away from them. And this is the whole crux of the question about education and miseducation. Because if we just take what they were doing without interrogating it, identifying what's wrong about it, and changing what's wrong while keeping what's right, then we're not making progress. It's not good enough, for example, to say, yes, we want to do history, and we use the history books that tell us that Europeans are superior to us, Eurocentric history books, like we still do throughout most of Africa. We have to have history books that tell our own stories from our own points of view. We could no longer be using those racist texts that are used in some French-dominated parts of Africa that talk about our Gallic ancestors. That's the most insulting thing. We must no longer be using books that tell us about Europe and nothing about Africa. Education and liberation, like charity, begins at home with ourselves. And if we go off learning about other people and we don't learn at all or enough about ourselves, it's a sure way of enslaving us in the worst way possible, mentally. So all of these things become relevant.
Indeed. And so...
Go ahead, brother.
No, I was just saying in relation to books, because we've got about 9 minutes to go and we haven't covered much about your credential today, but it was just a full rounded view about, I think, the situation that we faced. And so the next time, I mean, you've written a lot of articles and books. I mean, we're going to focus on our next conversation here, when possible, talk about, books and the books that you've written, and also give us an indicator of where to go and look for certain books. And I'm sure a lot of old school people do read, but the younger generation these days hardly read. And also the programs that we engage in sometimes doesn't really fulfill our desire of what we want to become, a real and potent African.
Yeah, again, it goes back to what are we doing to promote our own interests? Femi Biko organized a very, very effective courses of study. Other people are doing the same thing. But to me, we need to know about these examples because they're there to tell us, well, you don't have to depend wholly on the European education system to give you what you need. Okay, it's good to go and get papers from European institutions, the universities and so on. But how much do you know about yourself when you go to those places where you're insulted and told that, you're nothing,
Yeah.
So it's important. Even if we're going to... Go ahead, bro.
No, I mean, it is true, because sometimes no matter how much we do, how much we try, we still get pulled back and knocked back for little small minute details.
Well, look, I'll put it this way. We should not be silly enough to believe that Europeans don't understand that it's in their interest, from their own point of view, to oppress us and prevent us from knowing about ourselves. That's been my experience at the University of East London, where I founded an Africa Study Center, and they destroyed it deliberately. They used some of our own people to try to do that. one European man with a master's degree from a provincial university wanted to be the head of that Africa Study Center. Didn't know a single thing about Africa. I graduated with a PhD from what they call one of their best universities.
Yeah.
This guy didn't have anything near to my qualifications. But because he's white, he felt that he should be the head of this thing that I founded.
Right.
And that's the kind of arrogance with most white people. And when we go to their institutions, we need to be very clear about what their project is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we're going to expect that they're going to welcome us with open arms, well, you know, when people like that praise me, I look around and I say, what's going on here? I have to check myself.
You know? Yeah. I mean, we can go on and on and on. Dr. Kimani Nehusi, an elder, an uncle. We can do the traditional way, in fact, and forget about the titles. I hope you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
But we can go on and on. I mean, it's coming towards the end of the show. But would you come back again, and specifically, because I know today was very difficult. I had Kenneth, a regular participant here, but you know, today being that yourself and a very landed man in the community around the world who've taught not just your own people, but I mean, people have learned from you, and you just mentioned your little experience there at the University of East London. I remember that very, very well, and I remember the obstacles and the pressure that you went through, and you know. But, you know, would you come back again another time so I can specifically, I mean, address and talk to you?
Yes, most definitely. Just arrange it. I'll be happy to do that.
We'll do that. We'll try and arrange that in the next couple of weeks. So for those our listeners listening, right. You know, they've got a couple of weeks. So we might do it on a Wednesday, on a Thursday, and in a couple of weeks' time.
Well, please make your suggestion, and I will try my best to accommodate whatever suggestion you make. But I'm, you know, just announcing my agreement to come on the program and, you know, take full advantage of your invitation. And, you know, I'm very happy to be able to contribute to the program. So once I'm available, or once I have long enough notice and I could shift things around to make myself available, I will be available.
And on that note, I want to say thank you very much for your time spent with us here. And, you know, I want to really appreciate you and say thank you very much, and have yourself a wonderful afternoon there in Pennsylvania.
Well, thank you very much, Brother Freestyle, for giving me the opportunity to, you know, participate in the discussion. I hope that you and listeners are coming away with something from this discussion, and that, you know, I'm looking forward to contributing in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much. I think one of your cousins is not pleased with the conversation today. I don't know why.
Somebody objected. I mean,
well, yeah, it says, I think the texter was saying is your cousin, and it doesn't really too please. I think he'd imagine I was cutting you when you was talking. I don't know exactly where and how he was listening.
Well, I don't know who that is. Probably the person will text me, or they've already done that, and I will see it later on.
Right.
But this introduces a possibility. Do you have listeners calling in to contribute to the discussion?
Yes, I mean, some of the discussion is good for the listening ear, actually, because, yeah, they do call in, definitely. But we'll organize a time where we can have a really 3 hours, so we can invite callers to call in and contribute to the show. But it's coming towards the end. I mean, Dr. Kimani Nehusi, our elder, our brother, our uncle, thank you very much, sir, for coming through.
Thanks, brother. And we'll talk later on.
Okay, thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Sir Kenneth?
Yes, sir.
I'm really sorry about today, but you've made it possible. You've made it possible for us to have a conversation, and we're coming close towards the end of the time. But I'm going to say goodbye to you, and I will talk later on. And next Tuesday we'll be here again by yourselves. Thank you very much for participating today. All right.
It was a pleasure. Okay, be safe. Okay.